Hello BookTube, how have you been? It's been a while, hope you've been doing well. As for me, I've moved countries, so I've moved back from the UK to the Netherlands, and one of the things it means is that I'm now reunited with my books that were staying at my parents' place, so all my books are together, well, all my kind of adult books, my children's books, those are all still at my parents' place. But I thought that now everything's all nicely together, it would be a good opportunity for a bookshelf tour. So let's have a look at my shelves. Also, please don't mind the pink color. I wanted to move in quickly, so I didn't want to repaint this room. So we can start up here with my sci-fi short story anthology collection. So these are the best science fiction of the year by Neil Clarke. I can highly recommend if you kind of want to get into sci-fi or get a bit of a feel for all the different possibilities, because these have a collection by many different authors, great variety of authors, great diversity of authors, and also diversity of styles and subgenres of science fiction. So really a good way to get into those, and well, as you can see, I'm collecting them. So I think Neil Clarke started bringing these out. This is the first volume, was 2015. 16, 17, 18. No, sorry, I'm right. 2015, 16, 17, 2018, and 2019 will of course come out sometime next year. I haven't read this one yet, the other three I have. Can highly recommend. Then moving down, we get to the sci-fi and fantasy shelf. So some of the usual suspects. We've got the Hitchhiker's Guide, Asimov, Banks, some books set in Eberron, which is a D&D setting. Scott Card, Becky Chambers. Also this one, not talked about enough on BookTube, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, can highly recommend. A fantasy book written in kind of a Jane Austen style, with humorous footnotes, if that sounds like you. And then can recommend one favorite quote of mine. It's set in kind of Victorian England during the Napoleonic Wars, so technically I guess Regency England. And one of the main characters, Jonathan Strange, is a magician, and he gets asked, because he's helping out the British Army, is asked whether a man could ever kill another man by magic, and his reply is, "A man might, but a gentleman never could." So yeah, if that sounds like you, highly recommend that one. Hunger Games I enjoyed, but never enough to get the rest of the series. Manhigh Castle, and then we get to Gaiman. As you can see, I have quite a lot of Gaiman. I haven't read all of his, but really enjoyed the things I have. And then another favorite of BookTube, Robin Hobb. And if you want to know why Robin Hobb is so great, I can highly recommend Incirculatory Pun here, who's gone on justifiably at great length about Hobb. You can see I've got halfway through the Realm of the Elderlings, so I need the last two books of that series, and then the new Fitz trilogy I still need to read. N.K. Jemisin, I've read 100,000 Kingdoms and then the Broken Earth trilogy, which of course famously won the Hugos 3 years in a row. Highly recommended. Ursula K. Le Guin, I've already discussed on this channel. And Lecky, another recent great sci-fi. Chichin Yu, Three Body Problems, well known in sci-fi circles, but less on BookTube. I quite enjoyed, but he's a bit like Asimov at the beginning. It's an ideas sci-fi in the classical sense, so that's car driving away. So yeah, you need to read it for the ideas and kind of for the background. A lot of it's kind of set, the early part of the book set to the backdrop of the Cultural Revolution, which I didn't know much about. That was an interesting setting, but you need to read it for that and not so much for the characters. So some people don't mind that, but if you're the kind of person who really wants to connect with the characters and have deep characters, then skip this one. Then this anthology of science fiction short stories, but translated from the Chinese, again recommended. Well, we all know George R.R. Martin. I read the first book and really enjoyed it. Haven't yet gotten around to the second book or the rest of the series. Cormac McCarthy, we all know, was okay. Not one of my favorites. We have Karen Miller. The first one especially does really interesting things with the chosen one trope in fantasy. The second two of this trilogy were okay. But yeah, the first one I found really interesting. Cersei, I think we all know about. China Mieville, if you want something really far out there and weird, check him out. Naomi Novik, people like her a lot. I found okay in a fluffy sense, but not something that I really ever wanted to get more of. For Aragon. And then we get to Discworld, starting here with The Color of Magic, the first by publication order. And then we go back to the beginning here, and we have all the rest of Discworld up to here. In fact, up to here. And then we have some more Terry Pratchett, but non-Discworld. So yeah, so I'm missing two Discworlds, which is Raising Steam and the last of Tiffany Aching ones, which is the Shepherd's Crown. So I'm not entirely sure why I've never got around to getting those yet. I guess partially two reasons. One is that my favorite Discworld, or best Discworld in my opinion, is Thud. And after that it kind of went downhill a bit. So I've been a bit afraid of getting Raising Steam because it probably won't live up to my expectations. Or at least I'm worried about that. And also, since Sir Terry Pratchett has sadly passed away, it will probably be the last Discworld I ever get. So I guess it's also kind of stopping me. I do have a plan to someday soon TM make an introduction to Discworld, explaining where to start and why people have flame wars about which book to start with. So look out for that in a future video. But in the meantime, there's an unappreciated gem of Terry Pratchett's, which is Nation, which is technically YA, but I highly, highly recommend. It's not set in his Discworld universe, it's completely standalone, but it is really, really good. Lots of interesting things to say about science and society and religion and colonialism, and what it means to live in a nation and what holds you together. Yeah. Check that one out. Nice and thin, it's YA, it's quick read, but full of thoughts. Okay, then we have Pullman, His Dark Materials and the Book of Dust, Volume 1. As you can see, I need to get myself Volume 2 at some point, but oh, we all have a to-read pile that's too big, right? Moving on, Hanu Rajanemi. Really enjoy him. Really inventive sci-fi. Amazingly manages to be at the same time really hardcore sci-fi in the sense that none of the laws of nature, as far as I know, get broken, but at the same time it's completely far out what happens. Also very much not something I would recommend as your first sci-fi book. There's a lot of stuff going on that is not explained at all. There's practically no exposition in the book, so you kind of have to figure it out. And if you've read sci-fi before, or you know a bit about quantum physics, and that is your interest, you know, there are tropes and concepts that have been used before, and it's a bit easier to figure out what's going on if you have some familiarity with kind of sci-fi already. But if you are into sci-fi, definitely pick these out. Summerland, on the other hand, I think I already discussed once in a recent reads video. That one you can also read if you're not into sci-fi that much. It's also somewhat of a sci-fi book, but more of it's set in alternate 1930s, but where like ghosts and spiritualism actually work and exist. Kim Stanley Robinson, another famous classic sci-fi, I would almost say. The books are good, but a bit of a slog to get through, which is why I never read Blue Mars, only Red and Green. Dan Simmons, I really liked, especially Olympus and Ilium, rather bricks, but if you like quantum physics, Shakespeare and Greek and Roman mythology all in one book, definitely one to read. And then another unappreciated classic that I don't hear enough about is Jonathan Stroud and his Bartimaeus trilogy. These are brilliant. So it's a fantasy books set in roughly alternate version of our timeline, but magic exists, but the way magicians do magic is by binding genies and demons to do their will for them. And if they get it wrong, then the genies try to like get out from under what's been laid on them by misinterpreting or willfully overinterpreting or literally interpreting the wordings of the contracts. Yes, that's great. It's told from the point of view of Bartimaeus, who is a genie who gets summoned by this young magician. And although some of the chapters are kind of following the magician rather than Bartimaeus, he kind of interjects by having humorous footnotes in the magician's part. Yeah, check those out. Enjoyable. Lord of the Rings, to my shame, I have to admit that I've never gotten further than about there in the book, twice. So, it's one of these days, but it's so big, so many other books I want to read as well. Annihilation, I don't know if I talked about it on the channel, I read it not so long ago, it was okay. Martian, I enjoyed, but I also agree with a lot of the criticisms of it. And the interesting thing to me is that when I read criticisms of Artemis, which I haven't read myself, but the follow-on, I always think, if you didn't like that in Artemis, why did you like The Martian? Because all the criticisms that people have of Artemis seem to apply to The Martian as well. And then some more books set in Eberron, and some short stories set in the Warcraft universe, and my D&D dice and minis. So that was the sci-fi and fantasy shelves, and we go back here to literature and general fiction. Most of it's in English, but there's the occasional Dutch book that snuck in. For example, here we have Gad Abdollah, The House van de Moskee. The House of the Mosque would be the literal translation. I don't know if it has been translated. Gad Abdollah is Iranian or Persian by birth, but he now lives in the Netherlands and writes in Dutch. I've really enjoyed his books. Adichie, of course. Then who else we have? Some of these books I've already talked about. Austen, Pride and Prejudice, both the Penguin Classic, and this was the edition related to the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, for those of you who remember that. Border of Discuss, Bradbury, Italo Calvino. If you like experimental writing, I really enjoy Calvino. You have some Dickens, Dostoevsky, Eco, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Terror Tonight, did not really enjoy. A Man in Havana was interesting. John Green, well, we all know John Green. Goethe, I actually have one of my German books. In Holland you have to do German in high school, so I know enough German to kind of more or less be able to follow along and read a book in German, so I did. And for some reason Germans do their titles the wrong way around. Grant's book of African short stories. This nice collection of short stories by African authors. Great way to kind of broaden your horizons a bit. Mohsin Hamid. I got in before the hype, to have a very hipster saying. But yeah, I started with Reluctant Fundamentalist, which is brilliant, and one of the few books I know where the second person is used a lot. And then also, so I haven't got Exit West yet, but I have these other books. Black Cauldron by Heinesen was an interesting read because it's set in the Faroe Islands. Other than that, it didn't have too much to recommend itself. Hemingway, really enjoys short stories. His novels, less so. I mean, they're still interesting, still nice reads, but not my favorites. But sometimes I get in the mood for a bit of Hemingway. Ishiguro, on the other hand, definitely deserves all the praise he gets. Really love his writing. I think I've mentioned on this channel before. I don't know if I ever discussed Never Let Me Go, because I read that only recently, but... The Remains of Never Let Me Go I've discussed definitely, but The Remains of the Day I read recently, also excellent. There's interesting books. Stieg Larsson, well, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy. Some Lovecraft. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Love in Time of Color. We did not get on so well. I wasn't too impressed by the book. The book was okay, but then The Attitudes of Love, maybe it was meant ironically, but then it didn't come across to me, so didn't like it too much. If you like your historical fiction, Colin McCulloch has a series on the Roman Republic, which are great. Some African authors, Kintu, really good. Welcome to Lagos, also really enjoyed that. Cry, Beloved Country was a beautiful read as well. Rushdie, Frankenstein Baghdad, books I've discussed recently. Ali Smith I definitely need to read more of, because I've only read Autumn so far, but I really like that. Really like how she plays with language. Stevenson is kind of the ultimate nerd read, I would almost say. Like, he makes lots of little jokes and references and things which kind of work well, but then the book as a whole is just a collection of those kind of little anecdotes and fun facts and things strung together. So yeah, so I enjoyed the reading as such, but yeah, I don't know. Dracula, where do we have? De Man die kon rekenen. I'm not quite sure if it was originally written in Dutch or whether it was a translation, but it's kind of mathematical puzzles and tricks put together with a framing narrative, which you can enjoy. Tonter Stonson is well known, but I didn't get along with. Frank Treur is a Dutch author, written about her childhood in a kind of religious farming community in Zeeland, region in the Netherlands. Well, War and Peace we all know about. And then we go back. No, sorry, my shelves are a bit weirdly laid out, so they alphabetical by author and then group by genre, but then sometimes you have to go to the right shelf to go on. So we have Gentleman in Moscow, I Loved by Omar Tals. Chao Shixing's The Story of the Stone from the BookTube read along. Little Life, of course, and also this one I can highly recommend, the series The Kane Prize for African Writing, which is a prize for short story writing from Africa, and they bring out an anthology every year. Highly recommend that one. Then we do go back all the way here, because now we get to the non-fiction section. So this is general non-fiction, popular science mainly. So there are ones I want to highlight. Invisible Gorilla is a good one about kind of the ways our minds don't work, or don't work as well as you think we do, about imperfections in the memory and so on. Deborah's Handbook, who's a present from my friends when I went to the UK, so that I would know how to conduct myself properly. Yes, one I read is Ice by Mariana Gosnell. You think ice, just frozen water. Can't really be so interesting. Yes, it can. You can write a 500-page book about many different aspects of ice. Just about everything you ever cared to know about ice and didn't know you wanted to know about ice is in this book. Check it out. Structures by J.E. Gordon. I kind of like this as popularization of my own field of research. It's noticeable that it was written in the 1960s and some of the attitudes that shine through, but for kind of, and some of the knowledge in there is a bit out of date, but for kind of general introduction to why things don't fall down, which I believe is the subtitle, yes, or why things don't fall down, it's still an enjoyable read. Another classic, How to Lie with Statistics. Definitely check that one out, and you'll never read the newspaper the same way again. Thinking Fast and Slow is one that got a lot of buzz recently about, again, how our brains do or don't work. Nick Lane has written at least 2 books that I know of about kind of biochemistry and how our cells work. Tough reads, but well worth the effort to get through. Like, they're not terribly tough in the sense that it's very dry, it's just very information heavy, and that makes it slow going. And then we move here. What If by Randall Munro, of XKCD fame, with lots of funny things like ridiculous questions answered with physics. Like, what if I would pitch a baseball at a quarter of the speed of light? Phantoms in the Brain is again about kind of weird things our brains do, especially if they get damaged. What else do we have that's interesting to talk about? Skyfaring is a non-fiction collection by a pilot who has beautiful descriptions about his travels and about what do I want to say? Yeah, just about his travels and about how aviation works, how aircraft work. Well worth reading, both for the poetical content and if you want to understand more about what's going on behind the scenes next time you get on a plane. Well, The Odyssey in Emily Wilson translation, definitely recommend that one. In God We Doubt, a book on being agnostic, so neither atheist nor theist, but stuck in the middle, I'd almost say, by John Humphreys, well-known BBC presenter. Chris Hadfield, really interesting book about what it's like to be an astronaut, what kind of preparation goes into there, and what kind of lessons you can draw from that for life on Earth, which are sometimes a bit contrary to kind of the typical self-help advice. And then my very own book, J.A. Basco, that is me, Characterization of Fatigue Crack Growth in Adhesive Bonds, which I'm sure all of you are now dying to read after hearing that title. But this is my PhD thesis, which in my university you have to get bound. Fortunately, the university does contribute to the cost of that, so I had 150 of these nice books printed, so I have an actual physical book containing the 4 years of my life I spent on my PhD. If you're interested in reading that, you can actually download it for free online, and I will put a link in the description. Okay, so that was in this section. We've got some jokey books on Danglish, right? Mixed up Dutch and English. Then we go to some more non-fiction, but this case religion and history. So we have Qad Abdullah, apart from writing fiction, also did a Dutch translation of the Quran. This is on made-up languages. Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem, or The Banality of Evil. So this is philosopher Hannah Arendt's report of the trial of Eichmann in Jerusalem, as it says. It was an interesting read. It's worth noting that if you follow the Ask Historians subreddit, which I can highly recommend, a lot of historians there have kind of pointed out that Hannah Arendt's interpretation of events around about the Holocaust is not always entirely correct. So it's worth kind of reading a bit more widely if you want to form your picture about what happened and why. But still, interesting read. Aristotle, Ethics, I got due to the ethics course we had to take in the Masters, Engineering Ethics. And well, Aristotle laid the foundation kind of one branch of what we now call of ethics, which is virtue ethics, which is basically says the good thing to do is that which a good person would do. So I want to read a bit more about what Aristotle had to say about that himself. Karen Armstrong has some interesting writings about religion. Broken String about the Khoisan people in southern Africa. Behind the Beautiful Forevers was, I believe, a recommendation in the Vlog Brothers book club. With interesting non-fiction about life in slums in Mumbai. History of the British Empire, revolutions. Bill Bryson, interesting read. Joseph Campbell, The Hero of a Thousand Faces. Also, I think modern scholars have some things to say about his scholarship, but still interesting kind of comparison of different myths and kind of motifs that you see appearing again and again. And the hero's journey, of course, is a concept from Campbell. Confucius, I've read, I'm interested in what people believe and why, and I realize that reading the underlying text doesn't always tell you that much about what people currently believe, but still an interesting topic. So, read myself some Confucius, Norse myths. Vikings in America was interesting, but I think stretches evidence a bit far, it's a bit wishful thinking sometimes. Jared Diamond, we all know Eagleton, the Silk Roads, interesting about a bit more about Central Asia. Bible, Quran, Book of Mormon, which I got when I visited Salt Lake City, and they gave me one for free, which is very nice. I haven't actually read it yet. Tom Holland, really enjoyable history, although some of the historians I know kind of have some things to say about his research and being too uncritical of classical sources, but still interesting reads. Homer, well, we discussed that on the channel a couple of years ago. Herodotus. Herodotus was my author we had to read for my final exam in high school, so I have a fondness for Mr. Herodotus of Halicarnassos and his inquiries. And this is a series of books by Pete Hopkirk on what was called the Great Game, which is kind of the secret, well, not quite war, but the competition between England or the UK and Russia to kind of gain influence in in Central Asia, which of course for England was the road to India, and to safeguard India they wanted to kind of expand the influence. So if you want to know why the British went to Afghanistan, this explains why. Right, and about all kind of the secret expeditions and diplomacy that went on to kind of expand English and Russian influence over that region of the world. Some Vikings, some pirates. Joris Luijendijk, Dutch journalist, some really interesting books. One is Het zijn net mensen, They're Just Like People, which is about the Middle East conflict and how that gets framed in our media and kind of what systems and forces and realities of how news is made kind of dictates how we view that conflict, which is really interesting, kind of the dilemmas that journalists are placed in when they try and like report about it. And Dit kan niet waar zijn, I think in English translated as Swimming with the Sharks, which was his 2 years investigating the banks in the financial world in the wake of the crash in 2008. Some speeches, the Book of Five Rings, because I play the role-playing game Legend of the Five Rings. It's a Japanese book on swordsmanship. I have read it, I don't remember all that much about it. Then, this is an interesting one, Jawaharlal Nehru, one-time president of India and also, together with Gandhi, one of the leaders of the independence movement. And he spent a while in jail, and while he was in jail he wrote letters to his daughter, possibly with a view already of being published, I don't know, in which he discusses his view on world history. And they were bundled and published. It was really interesting. If you want a view that focuses a bit more on the history of India, of world history, and it's also a bit of a left-wing view of world history, definitely recommend that one. Barack Obama, I think this was written well before he became president, was kind of interesting insight into his life and also into race relationships in the US. Clarified a lot to me that I hadn't realized before as a non-USian and as a white European. Ovid, so the lobes, for those who don't know, one page is Latin, one page is English translation. So it's a good way to keep up your Latin if you haven't ever done it after high school. Orientalism, the classic I think I discussed not so long ago. The Pillar Book of Seishonagon. So this was a Japanese courtier, lived somewhere in the, I want to say 11th century or round about then. And she was basically living at court and had nothing else to do but write about what her day was like and things that happened. And that's been preserved somehow, so it's really an interesting picture of what life was like in medieval Japanese imperial court. And then over here we have my D&D collection. And then we go back here to the end of the history and religion shelf. So we have some more historical books and then Google. Some cookery books and some graphical novels and comics. Then here we have my aviation section. So some fighters, stories about planes, people flew them, travel writing, which is mainly Bill Bryson, but also some Michael Palin and some Paul Theroux. I really like these books, more for the concept than for actually what he writes about. I get the sense Paul Theroux is not someone I would find very pleasant if I were to meet him in person. But the kind of concept, he went by train from London to basically Japan. Of course, he has to do some of it by boat, but nearly all of it he did overland. And just that idea that you could get to Japan by train and a little bit by boat is fascinating to me. Some travel guides, and then you have some poetry and art. And then some more random collection of stuff. So that is my main shelves. And there's one last thing to show you, and that is the TBR pile. So here we have my reading chair. I still need to get a lamp to put behind it. but for now it does, especially during the day when I've light from outside. But here we have the TBR pile, including some books down here. So this is my collection of the Feynman lectures on physics. Not such a nice person, especially with how he treated women, but a great physicist and great explainer of physics. So I got this collection as a present for my PhD graduation from my department. Another more collection of aircraft books. So this is volume 1. Unfortunately, volumes 2 and 3 never saw the light of day because I think the publishing house went bankrupt, which we're still very sad about. This is a beautiful book about all the different planes flown by the Third Reich. But yeah, it says volume 1, so unfortunately it only goes up to from Arado to Focke-Wulf, the different factories, and then stops there. And then kind of similar in style with books on the different Russian or Soviet design bureaus and aircraft manufacturers. And then up here we have the to-read pile. So these are all the books I still need to read, excepting for these two. These are just here to remind me that I need to discuss them in a recent read video sometime soon, TM. Some more Hannah Arendt, Origins of Totalitarianism. Again, I've heard that from a historical point of view, her conclusions don't always quite hold up, so it's worth reading a bit more broadly than just Arendt, but I'm still interested in reading her. And then here we have Medieval Bodies. This was a present for my parents. It's about how people in the Middle Ages regarded the body, but you can see it's beautifully illustrated, so I'm looking forward to reading that one. Hopefully before the next Nonfiction November comes around, we never know. Some more various fiction and non-fiction. You can see it's all mixed up. I just have the big pile here, and then when I get near to the end of whatever I'm reading now, I have a look at this pile and say, I'm now in the mood for that one, and I pick it out. Some more Edward Said, because I really enjoyed him. Becky Chambers, the third book in her Wayfarer series. This year's Kane Prize anthology, Calculating Stars. Hearing Birds Fly is by Louisa Wall, who spent a year in Mongolia, and this is a memoir of that. Looking forward to that. I like reading about places I don't really know about, so Central Asia definitely fits that bill. Some more Italo Convido, T.S. Eliot, his poetry. Terry Nullius, sounded intriguing, so it's sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, I think, set in Australia and written by an indigenous or aboriginal author. Mark Calvino, Bulgakov, Master Margarita, I've heard good things about, want to read. Ulysses, one of these days I might actually get around to it, but I made sure to get an annotated version, because I think that will help the enjoyment a lot. Dawkins, as a person, not someone someone I feel like I wouldn't like very much if I met him in real life, but his writing is apparently good. And this is about biology, so I do still want to read that at some point. Some more Lecky, looking forward to that. Book on container shipping, which, well, it says brings us 90% of everything, but I know very little about that world, so I want to read more. Paradise Lost, which of course was also a basis for his Dark Materials, one of the reasons I want to read it, and was influential in many more things as well. And Lost Enlightenment, again present for my parents. I got a bunch of books from him for my birthday last year. History of Central Asia again. This one I just recently picked up at the airfield, How the World Thinks, so it's kind of a history of philosophy, but then also including some non-Western European perspectives, so looking forward to that. History of Europe, Havel, Power of the Powerless, some more Ishiguro that I haven't read yet. Gene Wolfe, I've heard a lot about, that he's supposed to be really good, so I look forward to reading that. Sci-fi-ish, literary sci-fi, as I understand it, and then some more classics. Merceau Investigation is kind of a sequel written 50 years after the fact by a different author, but kind of follow-up or reaction to The Outsider by Camus. And then finally here we've got Wees Onzichtbaar, so one of the other few Dutch books in the pile. So yeah, that was my bookshelves. I hope you enjoyed the store. And yeah, any thoughts, comments, things you'd like to know, questions, whatever, leave them down below, and hopefully see you again in a shorter time than the interval took to make this video. Bye bye!